everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, so I'm the first to go, and when I'm anxious, I have this Minnesotan twang that really comes out, so we're just all going to suffer through that together, okay? Like I said, my name is Dr. Kyra Meyer. I'm a licensed mental health clinician at Providence Valdez Counseling Center. That is a really wordy way of saying I'm a mental health person. So, you might have heard me on KVAK talking about addiction, and I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to take that talk on addiction and take it a step further. So clinically, when we're talking about addiction and mental health, we have this umbrella term, right? Addiction. And on one side, we have substance addiction, which most people are very familiar with. That's where we're talking about people who have substance problems with alcohol, opioids, any of those things. Nicotine, my personal favorite, caffeine. I'm going to try that again, and you guys are going to laugh. My personal favorite, caffeine. Thanks, yeah. So everybody seems to be pretty familiar about that. So what we're going to talk about today is the other side of the umbrella, which is what we call process addictions. Most people have heard about these a little bit, but they aren't super duper familiar with them. I want you to think of process addictions as things that you do, as opposed to things that you consume. So that includes shopping, gambling, sexual activity, pornography, eating disorders, internet usage, exercise, and work, okay? And what's interesting about process addictions is that we follow the same 11 DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's what we use to diagnose mental health concerns like depression and anxiety. But the DSM-5-TR uses the same 11 categories for process addiction as they do for substance. So I want to talk a little bit today about one that we all know about, and that's your phone, right? Oh yeah, I heard that groan. You're welcome, I'm here for it today. So some interesting information to get us started on tech addiction or smartphone addiction, however you want to word this. Smart device, choice is yours. The average person touches their phone just shy of 3,000 times throughout the course of the day, okay? On average, the average consumer with a smart device spends 3 hours and 15 minutes of their day on their phone, okay? So that means that if we look, and again, I'm a feelings person, not a math human being, so we're going to round that to 3 hours. So if we look at that in the context of a week, we're looking at 21 hours that you're on your smart device, right? And the other interesting thing is half of all phone pickups, meaning you put your phone down for whatever reason, and now you're picking it up again, half of all of those phone pickups occur within 3 minutes of the last time you set your phone down. So a lot of us struggle with phone or tech addiction, which is a process addiction, and we don't even realize it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over the 11 DSM criteria, and we're going to talk about some real-world examples. And then we're going to talk about what you can do about these things. And then we're going to end by talking about kids with smartphones or handheld device technology. One of the things that I think is really important whenever we're doing addictions work is to acknowledge that, yeah, it's a struggle. I struggle with this too. Some of the tips and tricks that we're going to talk about later are things that I put into place with myself and with my family. Obviously, we can't ever control other human beings, but we can do our best to help limit that technology. So we're going to go over SUD criteria, or in this case, process addiction criteria from the DSM. So the first one for anything, for substance or for process addiction, is larger amounts. You're using larger amounts and you're using for longer than intended. So here are some actual hands-on examples of what that looks like. Scrolling, gaming, texting, death scrolling. Anybody else do that? Where you sit down and you're just going and going and then you literally lose track of time. Losing track of your time, you sit down and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna take a brain break for a quick 5 minutes. And then an hour later, 45 minutes later, you're like, whoa, 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 I just lost all that time. So that's what the first criteria looks like. The second one is unsuccessful attempts to cut down, okay? So this means, now I'm guilty of this, on my phone I have set time limits for some of my fun apps, right? I cannot use Reddit, I'm addicted to that, literally, look at all that, that's what I do. I have set time limits on how much I can do just scrolling on Reddit. And then sometimes it'll pop up and be like, you have 2 minutes left. And I'm like, extend, extend, extend. So that is an absolutely unsuccessful attempt to cut down. Or for some people, this looks like sneaking technology, right? Like your partner is sound asleep and you're like barricaded behind the pillows, right? So sneaking tech. So the third one is time spent seeking. So when we talk about substance use disorder, this one's pretty clear, right? These are folks who are like, oh, I'm running low on my substance. I need to run to town to the store. I need to go find somebody who can help me. But what this looks like for tech addiction is shoving it into time that you don't have, okay? Staying up too late, getting caught up, being unable to stop. Suddenly, it's 2 a.m. and you're like, I've been on TikTok for hours, right? Like, how did I get here? Time spent seeking. Fourth, cravings. So that one's pretty obvious, right? How many of you at the end of a day, especially the end of a really hard day, oh, it has been a day, and you're like, all I want to do is just sit on my sofa, and I just want to forget about everything for like 5 minutes and Insta. And then it just keeps going. But that is a craving. That is your brain sending out neurochemicals saying, this is how we're going to deal with this real concern of saying I'm overwhelmed and stressed out. My neurochemicals are screaming for this, just in the same way that people who struggle with substance addiction have those neurochemicals screaming for them. So the fifth one is failure to fulfill obligations, okay? And again, with substance use disorder, that tends to be pretty clear, right? Oh, you were drinking and you didn't go to work. When we're talking about smart tech, handheld devices, this can look like things like not parenting, right? And again, I'm guilty of this too, that I'm like on my phone because it's been a day and my son's like, hey, mom, 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 mom. And I'm like, yeah, that's me saying I would prefer this than interacting. That's not adulting, that's not parenting. Not adulting, not partnering, right? Not spending time with your loved ones because instead you're making those choices. And obviously none of us ever get home and are like, you know what I'm gonna do? Spend 45 minutes on Instagram and TikTok and forget about my family. No, none of us ever make those choices. My grandmother, God rest, she was the woman of roughly 1,000 sayings. She used to always say, oh honey, about one of my great uncles. Oh honey, at one point he stopped holding the bottle and the bottle started holding him. And woman of the, trust me, she had a lot of others. Just ask my poor husband. Thank you for that laugh. When I think about this one, that failure to fulfill those obligations, it's not that I don't want to be an involved mother or wife or friend. It's that I can't help. It's here. My brain chemistry is screaming out for that. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about a process addiction. So the next one is continuing to use despite social problems. So what this looks like in real life is loss of in real life relationships. When you're suddenly like, oh no, I have to follow up with blah, blah, blah on Insta, and your family's going, I don't know who that is. That's like, I know that's a real person, but they live in Finland. Maybe you should pay attention here, right? So you're suddenly sacrificing those things. And sometimes those sacrifices come up on us so incredibly slowly that we don't realize that we're giving them up. One of my very favorite authors is Neil Gaiman. I love him. And one of his favorite books, or one of my favorite books of his, is American Gods. And one of the gods in that book is TV. And one of her followers says, well, what do people sacrifice to worship you? And she says, their time, sometimes their relationships. And that has always struck me because I think about that with tech addiction, especially with failing to fulfill those obligations. So the next one is activities or hobbies are given up, right? Here's my real big one, because I do this all the time. I need to get on this treadmill and I need to run 5 miles. Well, that sounds super fun, I'm going to pregame this with 5 minutes on Instagram. Just 5 minutes. Is it ever 5 minutes though?
Mm-mm.
No, I mean, maybe it is for you, and if so, truly good for you, and I mean that. But a lot of us struggle with that addiction. It's hard to put it down. And we're going to talk about some hands-on things you can do in those moments. Number 8 is using despite physically dangerous situations. Obviously, the biggest one is, are you texting while driving? That's a 5,000-pound car that you're driving around, or truck on icy roads. There are usually children and the elderly, though, I mean, to be honest, the rest of us would like to live as well. Thank you. Are you texting? Are you trying to figure out what's happening next on your phone? That is unsafe. Also, real story, I spent 11 years in the middle school. I cannot tell you how many times I was walking down the hall, and I would think to myself, I am not deviating. And then a child runs into me because they're on their phone. Right? And it was always a great moment to be like, hey, put it away. Come be with us. It's people time. So number 9 is using despite physical problems. How many of you work an office job where you get home and you feel kind of hunched from just me from charting? Ugh. But one of the physical problems we're talking about with smart device addiction is posture. How your neck and your shoulders feel. Do you get a headache from it? Is it starting to hurt? All of those things are a big indication that, hey, something's going on. And the last 2 are tolerance and withdrawal. So withdrawal is pretty obvious. If you had to go cold turkey from your smart device, could you do it? Real talk, I don't know if I could. And when I think about that and what that means, it makes me a little uneasy, and it makes me wonder a bit. And then tolerance is just, this is how I handle it. This is what I'm okay with. This is what my brain chemistry can handle. So let's talk about what to do, right? Process addiction is hard because when you look at that list, that's all stuff that we're having to do, right? It's not like cocaine where you can just opt out of it. Some of this we're supposed to do. And also, our society tends to have an attitude about some of these things that it's a good thing. I think about people who are like, oh no, I'm a workaholic. Oh, okay. But how many are you hitting on that? Or on your exercise addiction, how many are you hitting on that, right? So it's just something to think about. So you've heard me on the radio talking about risk reduction. And risk reduction is just saying that you are putting steps into place to reduce the chances of harm, which is where our little scare step comes into mind, okay? So if you're thinking to yourself, maybe this is something that I'm struggling with. Maybe this is hard for me, my smartphone or my smart device. The first thing that I would encourage you to do is collect your data. And sometimes that's real scary. You can go into settings and you can find this. How many hours a day you spend on average on your phone. And I'm willing to bet that it's going to be a bit eye-opening and sort of scary. That's okay. The first step is knowing what's going on so that then you can move on. So, what to change? That's always hard. I always encourage people to go for the low-lying fruit. So if your daily average is, let's say, 2 hours and 5 minutes, what would having 2 hours look like? And if you can do that for a couple days, what would an hour and 55 minutes look like? What would an hour and 50? And by doing that, we are slowly whittling away at that time, right? You're getting that time back before you even realize it. And then, like I said, lather, rinse, and repeat. So here are some hand-on things that you can do. The first, turn off notifications. Throw on airplane mode, hit do not disturb. Establish some hours in your life where you're like, nope, this is just when I don't have my device on. The second is remove triggering or distracting apps from your home screen. Do I need this? Is this beneficial? That's the sad story about how Reddit got moved to not my homepage. But it helps, right? Also, set time limits like we talked about, and this one's real hard, you gotta keep them. That's okay. When I hit that time limit now, I have a backup plan for what I'm going to do, okay? Physically move your phone away. So if you're driving and that's a struggle, chuck it in your back seat, right? Also, this one's hard. It's hard for a lot of people. Don't use it as an alarm clock. Get a good old-fashioned one. That way, it's not the first thing in your hands, because what happens when you turn off your alarm clock on your phone is you're automatically like, oh, and so texted me. Oh, and I should just check my email while I'm here. Girl, you haven't gotten out of bed yet. How about you do that, right? So, do that. My last bit that I wanted to talk about real quick is the concept of kids with smart devices. So, like a lot of you know, I spent 11 years at the middle school, which means that I've had a front row seat to kids in handheld devices. I never feel like more of an old fogey than when I say this statement. We survived it, so they can too, right? Suddenly I'm ancient. So I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of parents where we talk about if their child is ready to have a smart device. Here's what I will tell you of 11 years of anecdotal experience. I have never had a parent who said, man, I really wish I had gotten a smart device into my kid's hands sooner. Like, never. It's never happened. Because what's happening is when kids are engaging in those devices, they're getting the same dopamine spikes we get, right? Their serotonin's going up, and their brains are not fully formed, meaning that they're creating neural pathways where they need that spike so that they feel good about it. How many of you have had a young person in your life that you're like, dude, put the phone down, and they're like, I literally physically can't. This is why their brain chemistry and their neural pathways are changing. I want you to think about this as a bridge crossing, right? Once you cross this bridge and you give your young person a handheld that they're taking places and they're connected with, it is really hard to take that away. Ask any parent of a tween or a teen who has grounded their kid from the phone, right? It's painful not just for the student, right? It's painful for the parent. So, the other thing that I would encourage you to do is model behavior. Just like how we model healthy substance use around our children, and in my house that means saying things like, hey, mom and dad are going on a date tonight. Dad's going to have 1 beer, mom's driving home, okay? We're modeling those good healthy habits. Modeling good smartphone usage is important too. Hey, I hit my time limit, I need to put this down. So, I hope that that was helpful for you today. Truly, most of us struggle with this on some form or another. I know I do. So I hope that this was good information for you. Thank you.